What if the most dangerous ideas in history weren't the ones that were shouted, but the ones that were silenced? What if the person the world warned you about was actually trying to warn you? There's a name that echoes through philosophy, classrooms like a cautionary whisper, a name often associated with deception, manipulation, even evil. His legacy has been carved into stone with a single word: cold, calculated, ruthless. His books are still taught, but rarely understood. His ideas are quoted, but almost always out of context. And yet, buried beneath the reputation, beneath the centuries of distortion, is something very few people are ready to admit. He may have been the only one telling the truth. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come in comforting language. It doesn't wear a gentle smile. Sometimes the truth shows up with blood on its hands. And when that happens, we don't honor it. We bury it. History has a pattern. It takes the uncomfortable thinkers, the ones who expose what we desperately try to hide, and turns them into monsters. It twists their ideas until they become warnings, not insights. It sanitizes the thinkers who told us what we wanted to hear, and demonizes the ones who told us what we needed to hear. But what if everything you think you know about this man is a lie? What if his most famous book wasn't a manual for tyranny, but a mirror held up to a world already ruled by it? What if the reason we hate him is because he understood us too well? This isn't a defense. It's not a tribute. It's an investigation into how power rewrites the past, how truth becomes distorted through fear, and how a single man's attempt to expose the machinery of control was twisted into a blueprint for domination. He didn't invent manipulation. He revealed it. But we weren't ready, so we erased him. Or rather, we turned him into something else, something safe, a villain, a warning sign, a symbol of what not to become. That's how power works. It doesn't need to destroy truth. It just needs to disfigure it until no one can recognize it anymore. You've heard his name. You might have even used it as an insult. But what you've never been told is what he actually said, and why it was too dangerous to hear. This is the story of a philosopher who saw too clearly and paid the price for it. His name was Niccolò Machiavelli, a diplomat, a thinker, a man born into the ruthless political machinery of Renaissance Italy, a world soaked in betrayal, shifting alliances, and silent assassinations disguised as diplomacy. When you hear his name today, it's almost always as an insult. Machiavellian, cold, manipulative, cunning, heartless. A label slapped onto politicians, CEOs, or anyone who wields power without remorse. But here's what almost no one tells you. Machiavelli wasn't writing to teach tyrants how to rise. He was warning the rest of us how they already do. His most infamous book, The Prince, has been read for centuries as a blueprint for authoritarian control. People call it evil. They say it glorifies deception, that it celebrates the idea of power for power's sake. But if you strip away the judgment, if you read the words not with fear, but with clarity, you'll see something very different. You'll see a man documenting how the game of power is really played. Machiavelli wasn't fantasizing. He wasn't dreaming up a world of scheming rulers and strategic cruelty. He was describing the world he lived in. A world where promises meant nothing, where good men were crushed and liars were rewarded, where ideals were only useful if they helped someone win. He wasn't advocating for immorality, he was dissecting it. Because in a world where power is the only currency, what survives isn't virtue, it's strategy. Machiavelli watched as Florence, his home, was thrown into chaos. He served in government, tried to navigate diplomacy, trusted leaders, believed in ideals, and for that, he was imprisoned, tortured, and exiled. Imagine what it does to a man when he realizes that the world punishes honesty and rewards ruthlessness. So he did what most of us are too afraid to do. He told the truth about power, not how it should be, but how it is. That's why they hated him, because his book didn't flatter the elites. It exposed them. It didn't comfort the people. It unsettled them. And it didn't give society the lies it wanted. It held up a mirror to the lies it already lived by. So the world turned on him. They said he was dangerous, that his words could corrupt, that his ideas were poison. But poison to who? To tyrants who wanted their tactics to remain invisible? To societies that needed to believe they were ruled by virtue? To people who couldn't stomach the idea that goodness alone doesn't win? The truth is, Machiavelli was never the villain. He was the witness. He saw a pattern, how power was seized, how it was maintained, how it disguised itself as morality while committing unspeakable acts behind the curtain. He saw that rulers who claimed to be noble often used cruelty in secret, and the ones who were honest about their methods were labeled monsters. That's the trick. When someone tells the truth about how the world works, we don't thank them. We burn them, or worse, we twist their words until no one can tell what they really meant. Machiavelli's legacy was rewritten by those in power. His name became a slur, his ideas turned into caricatures, and the uncomfortable insights he offered, locked away behind centuries of misinterpretation. Because if we accepted his view of power, we'd have to rethink everything. We'd have to admit that our heroes aren't always good, that our systems aren't built on fairness, that success might have more to do with appearances than principles, that maybe the people we admire the most are just the best at pretending. Machiavelli didn't tell us to become monsters. He warned us that the monsters already walk among us, and that they're usually dressed in virtue, and that might be the most uncomfortable truth of all. Machiavelli didn't just write about politics, he wrote about people. And what terrified him most wasn't just that rulers lied, it was that people wanted to be lied to. He understood something most philosophers avoid, something even modern psychology is only beginning to grasp. Power is psychological. And deception works because we crave comfort more than truth. We don't want leaders who are honest. We want leaders who look honest. We don't want truth. We want confirmation, reassurance. A narrative that makes the world feel safe, even if it's built on a lie. Machiavelli knew this. He saw how people judged, appearances, not actions. How rulers could commit atrocities so long as they maintained an image of righteousness. This is the heart of what the prince revealed. It wasn't a celebration of manipulation. It was a dissection of it. He showed how power operates like a magician's trick, drawing your attention one way while the real work happens somewhere else. The illusion is always prettier than the mechanism behind it. So the prince must appear virtuous, not be virtuous, just seem like it. Because people don't examine a leader's soul, they examine their performance. This is what Machiavelli called virtù, not virtue in the moral sense but in the sense of mastery, the skill of appearing good while doing what is necessary. It's uncomfortable to admit, but it explains so much. Why we elect charming manipulators. Why we trust institutions that fail us. Why we defend systems that exploit us. Because they've dressed themselves in symbols we've been trained to worship. Flags, titles, religious words, human rights slogans. The costume matters more than the character, and those who master this illusion rule. But here's the most chilling part. Machiavelli didn't think people were innocent victims of manipulation, believed we were complicit in it. We reward the lies because the truth would shatter the world we think we live in. We want to believe that power is earned, that justice is real, that our leaders are noble. We cling to these beliefs not because they're true, but because without them, we'd have to confront the terrifying chaos underneath. So when someone like Machiavelli comes along, someone who rips the mask off and shows the machinery behind the performance, we don't thank him, we call him evil. But who's really more dangerous? The man who exposes the system, or the system that needs to hide behind a mask? Machiavelli didn't ask us to become liars. He asked us to stop being fooled by them, and that's precisely why he had to be buried. His ideas weren't suppressed, because they were false. They were suppressed because they were true, and truth in the wrong hands is always dangerous. Because if enough people start seeing through the illusion, the whole game falls apart. The crowd sees the strings. The emperor is naked. The palace is just a stage, and the people who once ruled with a smile are forced to reveal their teeth. That's the revolution Machiavelli hinted at, not with fire and swords, but with awareness. to see power clearly, to understand its psychology, to resist the performance and recognize the manipulation. But to do that, you have to let go of the comforting fantasy. And that is something most people will never do. After Machiavelli died, his name didn't fade quietly into the margins of history. It was hunted, not by assassins with blades, but by something far more effective: moral condemnation. The church branded his work as satanic. His name became synonymous with treachery. And for centuries, to be called Machiavellian was to be compared to the devil himself. But why? Why such a violent rejection of a man who simply wrote observations? Because he wrote them too clearly. He told the truth without moral decoration. He spoke plainly about how power works, how people are manipulated, how morality is often just theater, and that made him dangerous, not because he created the darkness, but because he illuminated it. So the distortion machine kicked into gear. His most famous work, The Prince, was stripped from its context. The satire? Ignored. The irony? Erased. The historical realism? Rewritten as instructions for evil. And it worked. For generations, Machiavelli was remembered not as a thinker, but as a villain, a corrupter of youth, a poisoner of virtue. He was taught in schools as a cautionary tale, not a critical mind. But look closer, and you'll notice something revealing. It was the church, the monarchies, and the empires, those who stood to lose the most from his truths, who screamed the loudest. Because what Machiavelli exposed was their playbook. He revealed how rulers could use fear over love, image over substance, religion as a tool of control. He showed how faith could be weaponized, how appearances could silence rebellion, how virtue could be mimicked to hide vice. And if people believed him, the illusion would shatter. So they didn't debate his ideas. They demonized him. It's an old trick still used today. When someone says something too uncomfortable, you don't argue with them. You destroy their character. You twist their words. You frame them as dangerous, immoral, insane. Because if people see the man as a monster, they'll never read his message. That's the genius of the distortion machine. It doesn't need to erase the truth. It just buries it beneath fear, ridicule, and half-truths, and we fall for it. Again and again. Think of how many thinkers were exiled, censored, or branded heretics, not for lying but for telling truths that threatened the status quo. Think of how many modern critics are silenced not by evidence, but by accusations. Not by debate, but by narrative. Machiavelli was one of the first victims of this machine, but he won't be the last. His fate is a warning, not just about politics, but about the world we live in right now. A world where image dominates substance, where propaganda feels like news, where powerful institutions still tell you who to fear, who to trust, and who to ignore. And the moment someone breaks from the script, they are labeled Machiavellian, a slur built on a lie. But lies don't erase the truth. They only delay it. And as more people begin to question the official stories, as more minds revisit the words of the men we were taught to fear, the distortion begins to crack. And behind it, you don't find a monster. You find a mirror. We like to think we've evolved. We like to believe we live in a world of transparency, human rights, progress. But if you look closely, if you strip away the PR, the slogans, the polished speeches, you'll realize something deeply unsettling. Machiavelli didn't describe the past. He predicted the present. The very tactics he exposed are now systematized. Politicians still smile while lying. Corporations still sell virtue while outsourcing suffering. Media outlets still create panic, not to inform, but to control. Fear remains the strongest form of obedience. Appearance still trumps substance, and the illusion of choice is more seductive than truth itself. Machiavelli warned us, centuries ago, that real power never screams. It whispers. It wears a mask. It hides behind good intentions and legal language and words like freedom, justice, and progress. He taught us that those in power don't need to be moral. They just need to seem moral. It's not about being just. It's about looking just enough. And in an age of mass media, social platforms, and algorithmic manipulation, this truth is more alive than ever. Today, the prince isn't one man in a palace. It's a machine, a corporate political media complex that feeds on perception. It doesn't need to rule by sword anymore. It rules through the screen, through carefully engineered outrage, through distraction, through endless debates that never touch the root of anything, and most importantly, through your desire to believe you're free. That's the masterpiece. 2E. Make the prisoner think he's not in a cell. To make the citizen think he's informed when he's entertained. To make the consumer believe he's choosing, when in fact, he's being chosen. Machiavelli would have recognized this instantly. He would have seen how elections are shaped by image consultants, how social media amplifies fear, how narratives are sold like products, and facts are buried under a mountain of emotional spin. He would have laughed at the idea that we live in a post-truth world, because for him, the truth was always optional. What matters is what people believe, and beliefs can be sculpted, rewritten, manufactured. It's not a conspiracy, it's a strategy. And the people who understand it don't wear black cloaks and chant in secret rooms. They wear suits. They host award shows. They run your newsfeed. They fund your influencers. And they know what Machiavelli knew. People don't want reality. They want comfort. So give them an enemy. Give them a hero. Give them a narrative where they're the good guys. And they'll follow you into war, into poverty, into submission, smiling all the way. We haven't outgrown Machiavelli. We've perfected him. His principles live on, not because we embrace them, but because we deny them. Because as long as we believe the lies are truth, and the actors are leaders, and the slogans are salvation, we remain exactly where the powerful want us. Distracted, divided, blind. But there's another side to this, and it's the reason Machiavelli still matters today. Because once you see the strings, you can't unsee them. Once you understand how power manipulates emotion, once you recognize that morality is often a mask, once you stop expecting truth from those who benefit from illusion, you begin to reclaim something they don't want you to have. The ability to think clearly in a world that feeds on confusion. The courage to ask, who benefits from this? The strength to sit with uncomfortable truths instead of comforting lies. Machiavelli didn't tell us to become monsters. He told us to stop being puppets, not to imitate the prince, but to see him, to understand how the system works, and to stop mistaking the performance for reality. Because once enough people do that, the machine begins to shake, the masks start to slip, and a new kind of power emerges. Not the power to rule others, but the power to rule yourself. Machiavelli never asked to be a hero. He didn't claim to be virtuous. He didn't wrap his words in poetic delusions. He simply looked at the world and refused to lie about what he saw. That was his crime. He described human nature not as we wish it to be, but as it is. He saw that people could be noble, but also weak, fickle, cruel. He saw that power doesn't flow to the righteous. It flows to the strategic. And he dared to say it out loud. That's why history tried to bury him, because Machiavelli didn't tell us to become evil. He told us the truth about how evil hides in plain sight. He didn't encourage tyranny. He warned us how tyrants gain control and how they keep it. He didn't celebrate deception. He revealed how leaders use it and why the masses fall for it, again and again. He showed us the mechanics behind the performance, the script behind the speech, the manipulation behind the morality, and that knowledge is dangerous because once you see the game, you can't play it blindly anymore. You stop being a pawn, you become a watcher, and then, if you're brave enough, you become a thinker. Not the kind who recites philosophy to feel smart, but the kind who uses it to survive reality, because the world doesn't need more idealists who can't stomach the dark. It needs realists who can walk through the dark without becoming it. That was Machiavelli's path. Not to embrace cruelty, but to understand it. Not to worship power, but to expose how it's built. Not to lose hope, but to make it stronger by anchoring it in truth, not fantasy. That's why Machiavelli matters now more than ever. In a world flooded with spin, spectacle, and shallow outrage, where people confuse feeling good with doing good, where institutions speak of justice while practicing exploitation, where truth has become negotiable, Machiavelli doesn't push you toward despair. He pushes you toward clarity. He doesn't hand you answers. He hands you a lens and asks, can you bear to see clearly? That's the final test, not of Machiavelli, of you. Can you look past the slogans, the heroes, the smiles? Can you resist the temptation to believe what comforts you, and instead believe what prepares you? If so, Machiavelli isn't your enemy. He's your ally. Not because he gives you hope, but because he gives you something far more powerful. And when the world burns through illusion after illusion, when the promises fail and the actors forget their lines, it will be the ones who understand, who will still stand, not because they had the most faith, but because they saw the truth and faced it anyway.